Hello, my name is Gary Sundquist, and this is my final project presentation for my modified credit card approval system by 1,000 projects. I chose the credit card approval system because it provided me a means to learn more about tracking credit card data, which is a system somewhat similar to what my current employer uses, but gives me a better understanding of the data that needs to be tracked. Here is a description of the credit card approval system located on the 1,000 Projects website. I chose to adapt this code for Metro Storage because I used to work for the facility and have an understanding of what types of transactions are processed and what data would need to be tracked. I had to make modifications to the customer form, such as adding the transaction log for the customer. I added a login form for legal and security reasons. I added a data grid view for the products that Metro Storage sells, and I also added proper error codes to be displayed during validation of transactions or creating a customer or a card record. So let's take a look at the actual application. So here is the first take a look at the database connection class. The database connection class, it just contains the directory in which the database is stored, and then also a get set for the connection string. And here's a customer data class, and it contains a customer class, a cards class, and transactions class, which we create objects of within the application. The customer and cards both use the customer data interface. They also contain methods to update data in the database for customers or card records, and also to process transactions. Let's now take a look at the login form. The login form contains a text box for the user and the password. Let's take a look at the code. So in the code, it grabs the username and password provided, validates it against the database, and it pulls back a user group ID. And then with that user group ID, it passes it to the main menu, opening the main menu with the tool strip items enabled, depending on the permissions that the user has. So now let's close all of these, and let's take a look at the main menu now. So these are the forms that are either enabled or disabled depending on the user's permissions. They're all disabled by default, but they're enabled if the user has permissions to view these forms. And then here's the login, logout, and exit. The login is disabled when a user is actually logged in, and the logout is disabled when the user's already logged out. So if a user hasn't signed in yet, the login's enabled, the logout is disabled, and vice versa if a user is logged in. And then the exit tool strip item, it closes the application. Let's take a look at the code. So the code, it just shows opening the forms when the buttons are clicked, the tool strip menu items are clicked, and this is to exit the entire application. And when a user logs out, I found some code on Stack Overflow that closes out all of the forms so that no existing forms are left open when a user logs out. Okay, now let's take a look at the customer information class. So the customer information class, it contains all the customer information for the database to track a customer record. It also contains all the transactions for the customer. So if this form is past the customer ID and they have previous transactions, they will be populated in this data grid view. If it's a new customer, obviously nothing will populate in the transaction data grid view because this is a new user and they don't have any previous transactions. And then there's a save button to either save an existing record if this form is past the customer ID, or it will create a new customer record if it's not past an existing customer ID. Then there's a clear button to clear all the form fields. There is a new card button to clear all the form fields and allow you to insert a new card record, and this clears out that customer ID as well, so it doesn't try to save to an existing record. And then there's a close button to close this form. So let's take a look at the code. Here's the two initialization methods for the class, which shows the customer being passed through into the application, and then one without the customer being passed. Here's the save method showing that we're saving the customer to the database. The clear button calls the clear form method. The clear form method clears out all of the fields. Then there is a validate fields method, which validates all the form fields that are necessary in order to add the record to the database, and it goes through and checks all the fields that need to be edited and displays one message instead of one message for each error, individual error. This validates that the date time picker for the birth date has been updated. This validates that the phone number is at least 10 digits long. This is to close out the form. This is to create a new card. And this method is to populate the form with the existing customer's information, and also the data grid view as well. So now let's move to the card information form, which this form is passed a customer ID either by a customer object or a cards object, and the list box here is populated with all the cards for that customer. And then whenever a list box item is selected, it'll automatically populate the text fields to the right with data associated with that card record. And then the select button will populate a process transactions form that's open with the card data for the selected index from the list box. You can create a new card for the customer ID that was passed to this form. You can save that new card, and then you can close the application. You can't edit an existing card. So here is the code for the form. Here it's showing the form being passed a customer object and a cards object. The close method, the method to get all the card records and load the list box, the method to populate the text box whenever the list box item's changed, the button to save a new card record. It ensures that all the fields are populated appropriately, and then it creates a new card record for the customer. And then here's the button to clear all the fields to create a new card. Here's the button to select the card and populate it in an opened process transactions form. Here's the class to clear all the fields in the form. Here's the method to validate the data in the form prior to saving the record. And here we validate that the date time picker has been changed, the date's been changed. So now let's go to process transactions form, which this form, it lists the current system time up here with a timer that's updated every half second. This button allows you to select a customer. This button allows you to open the customer information form to create a new customer. These radio buttons allow you to select either to process this transaction as a cash or card transaction. This button will allow you to select a card record for an existing customer, so customer has to be selected in this text field prior to this button being able to be selected, and then a card information form is open so that you can select the record. And there's a close button and a button to process a transaction. So in the code, you can either open up the transaction form with a customer object or without one or without anything. Here is the timer. Here is the button to open the new customer form or the customer information form to create a new customer. Here's the button to close the form. Here's the button to open up the select payment type. Here we check which one's selected, which radio button selected. Here we open the new view new form to select a customer. Here we get all the products for the data grid view. They're populated here, like terms and the price of all the items. Here in this method we get the customer. We check and we update the total price in the total label depending on whenever a new cell is selected, it's automatically updated. And here we enable the terms field in the data grid view if the field does have a term. And here we validate the record before processing it to ensure that all the fields are filled out correctly. Now let's take a look at the view new form. So this form we can take a look at all the customers in the database, how many cards that customer has. We can also take a look at all the cards in the database, which customer they belong to, and the amount available in the card type. We could only open a transaction on the customer tab by selecting a customer. In the card tab, this button is disabled. You can view the card information by selecting a card and clicking the new view selected. And the same thing goes with the customer tab. You can open up a customer information form with that customer's information when new view is selected. Then there's a button to close the form. So we're running out of time here, so I'll quickly go through this form. So it can, here we close the form. Here's the opening, the initialization of the form. Here we load the data grid view with all the customers. Here we load the cards data grid view with all the card records. Here's where we open the transaction form with the customer information. This is where we grab that customer information from the cells. Here's where we disable that make transaction button depending on which tab selected. Here we select the card information when we're in the card tab and one selected. And here is where we figure out if we're opening up a card information form or a customer information form. So now let's quickly take a look at the application itself. Here's some screenshots of the application running. Some error messages. Okay. And now I also want to real quickly go over the goals for each week. So the first week I did create the database tables. They're all created here. I did create all the forms. I was unable to create a products form. I didn't have enough time to do that. The customer application does include all of this information. Some of them were consolidated, like the street address, state, and zip was consolidated in the one field. Okay, the transactions tab does work in this way. The search view and modify tab, I didn't configure it this way because I configured the customer form to instead track all the transactions for the customer, because I thought it was easier to track it there than in the search and view modify tab. And I also did not have enough time to show how long a transaction has an existing lease for, which was not included in the customer form. And that is it for this application. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.